Thank you so much, Paul, for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for the BEAM team for inviting me to be here. It's really a privilege and a great honor to be able to be part of this really exciting conversation about additive manufacturing in the built environment. So today I'm going to talk about clay. I'm going to talk about 3D printed ceramics as an architectural material, as a cladding material, in this talk which is called How to Dress a Column. So I'm going to tell you about this project, Textile Column. It's a 3D printed ceramic interlocking tile system, which is a contemporary prototype for additive manufactured ceramics as a fire-resistant cladding material for structural steel. So I'm going to talk about the making of it, but also the background to making it, which is actually really an illustration of my approach to working with 3D printed clay as an architect. And I would say this approach is something that's informed by craft, the history of shaping clay as an architectural material, and more theoretical ideas about dressing structure and metaphorical references to textiles. And I'll finish just showing you a couple more projects and collaborations from my PhD research. Now, this is a diagram that aims to contextualize what I talk about, or what I do. So I work in the field of clay printing, which is, of course, part of the larger field of additive manufacturing. But this has very interesting crossovers and intersections with architecture in the form of tiles, bricks, and cladding systems, but also the field of digital craft-based ceramics. So we're thinking crafts, vessels, and much smaller scale items, more at the scale of the applied arts. So there's obviously a very technical discourse that happens here that links all of these fields because we're pretty much all using the same types of systems and machinery. But there's also a more theoretical discourse that I'm interested in, which is more part of the field of architecture, which is about ornamentation, how we actually design and make ornaments, what they actually mean. But also the field of tectonics, the science, the art of how we put things together and design joints in architectural systems. So in the run-up to Textile Column, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 4 projects that really have informed this approach. So this story starts with really the history of clay as an architectural material. In 1871, there was a big fire in Chicago, and what architects and engineers noticed was that the iron-framed buildings, or the iron-framed facades, they weren't actually destroyed by fire because the ceramic was acting as was protecting the iron frames from the fire, because, you know, as we know, at a certain temperature, there's a catastrophic collapse when we're using metal as a structural material. So Louis Sullivan and other architects of the Chicago school adopted the use of terracotta to create these fantastic ornate facades for the steel frame buildings. And this is a really beautiful use of the material because it's functional, obviously, in the sense that it's protecting the steel, but it's also incredibly decorative as well. What we also see in Sullivan's facade is a very clear reference to carpet patterns. This is an Assyrian carpet pattern on the right-hand side. And we know that Sullivan was very inspired by the writings of the theorist and architect Gottfried Semper and his Bekleidungsprinzip, or theory of dressing, and the idea that the expression of architectural walls is something that's derived from textiles. So Semper's theory was that textiles were one of the first architectural materials in the form of primitive tents and these kind of first enclosures. And he believes that all subsequent walls express this textile origin through patterns and motifs originally related to fabrics and carpets. And this is exactly what Sullivan is trying to do here in terracotta. And the reason this is important is that this metaphor is driving the artistic articulation of the material as it performs its functional role in protecting the steel. So we take a little diversion away from ceramics here to concrete. So this is Frank Lloyd Wright's Millard House, built in 1923 in Pasadena in California. And the reason this is important is, well, one, it takes the textile reference a step further. So it's worth pointing out that actually Frank Lloyd Wright was the apprentice of Sullivan, so this discussion about tectonics and textiles was something that must have been happening in the spaces where they were together. So in Sullivan's building, this textile reference is something that's really only skin deep. The textile references are on the surface. But for Frank Lloyd Wright, he's actually taking this to a more tectonic level and actually weaving the structures together with the metal rods within the frame. So it's tectonic. The textile reference is something that's tectonic rather than ornamental. So coming back to ceramics and fire-resistant cladding for steel, the approach that Sullivan and the other architects of the Chicago School, it didn't stay around for very long because engineers got much better at protecting structural steel through the use of intumescent plates and other cladding systems. So we only really see these buildings built for a period of around 30 years. But in 2002, the French practice Lacaton Vassal, they made this really very beautiful porcelain cladding system for structural steel. So the idea, it's very thin, they're only about 5 millimeters thick, but the idea is this kind of very thin veil-like ceramic cladding will protect the steel in the case of fire. Unfortunately, this didn't go into production as they had planned because they weren't able to really solve the joints between the individual pieces to make it actually work. And also there were issues with how you would actually adhere these tiles to the steel structure. So this is where we come to additive manufacturing and additive manufacturing ceramics. And one of the most exciting things about additive manufacturing with ceramics is this very precise deposition of the material, which means we have much more control over the geometry and the design of the pieces. And we can think about using additive manufacturing to really design really innovative joints between things. And this is where I show a couple of Bruno's work from Bruno's laboratory, the Advanced Ceramics Lab in Guimarães, that show ceramic discrete printed ceramic elements that are joined together in an innovative way. So the one on the right-hand side, this is the use of magnets, and you can see where they've controlled the print path to mean that you can actually place the magnet within the element and join them together. And on the left side, this is their Fiscus Columns project, where they made these bespoke plug systems that actually deal with the issue of the joint in the 3D printed ceramic piece. Now you'll see with a lot of additive manufactured products, there's this promise of continuity. You can keep printing and printing. But this is not the case in ceramics, because with ceramics you have to fire it and you have to dry it. So when you print something big, it's going to deform. So really in this field, we do really have to think about how how pieces are actually joined together. And this is a classic architectural problem. So now I'll talk about the textile column. And what I want to say is the 4 projects I've just shown you, they set up a series of questions. So can ceramics be considered again as a decorative fire-resistant skin when using additive manufacturing? How do you deal with the joints in such a system? And what happens... Sorry, I've lost myself here. And what happens when you consider historic textile references as either ornamental or tectonic strategies? So obviously with the aesthetics of additive manufacturing, there's this quite obvious weaving or knitting-like effect. And I'm interested in taking this textile metaphor something a bit further than just being a surface condition. So how do we actually interlock and think about how we can actually join the pieces together, thinking about textiles and fabrics as folding and interlocking and woven together pieces. So this piece here, this is one of the earlier tests I made thinking about making these joints between pieces. And I'm also thinking about how this joint can actually be something of an expressive seam to actually really make a statement about the point where 2 things are joined together. And these pieces are made in a way, so these are pieces from the actual column, that they're printed together, so but they only very lightly touch each other. So if you look at the print paths, there's 2 things happening here. The inner and outer layers, they're actually fused together, so you can't actually take them apart. But the adjacent pieces are printed at such a position that so you print them together and they're very lightly fused together, but as the ceramics dries and it becomes leather hard, which is something after about 24 hours, you can actually take the pieces apart and gently crack them, and then when you like this, and then you can reassemble them and put them into the kiln, fire them together, so when you've actually got them as your final element, they're actually a very good fit, and you get a really good fit around the steel. So here, this is the system itself. So you lock the piece around the column, you add the adjacent piece, and I'm using here just a steel tie to tie it together, which is also kind of in the theme of weaving and knitting them together. But the joint's actually hidden as the corresponding piece then comes over the top. And the idea is that you could just go on and on like this. It's supposed to be a dry fixing, so the idea is that you could disassemble it at some point if you needed to. But the reality is, as I've been putting them together, they do actually need a bit of adhesive to hold them in place. But I think this is the point to say that this system is not perfect, and this is where a lot of the work that I do sits. They are ideas, they're kind of pre-prototypes that explore theoretical ideas and practical ideas that have the potential to perhaps be taken further. Now, that's the final column. You can see it downstairs. It's somewhere in room 11. And the outlooks really for this project are working with an inner and outer layer and parametricizing the layers. And you can obviously think about working with different profiles of steel. I think there's potential in ways to think about the reinforcement. You could use the interstitial areas to think of other ways to actually weave and tie the pieces together. And of course, this interlocking principle can be developed with clay at a bigger scale or even a smaller scale as something that's both functional and ornamental. So a question I get asked quite a lot is sort of like, so what? Why do we need any of this? You know, you can quite easily pull apart the idea for ceramics as a, you know, ornamental ceramics as a skin for structural steel, because there's other ways to do it. But I think this project and this approach actually opens up many more questions about how we work with additive manufacturing in clay. So when it comes to structure, more artistic questions about what's concealed, what is revealed, what is ambiguous and what is clear. And of course, how joints are articulated when working with additive manufactured clay. And I think there's also some architectural questions which are technical, but also about art and beauty, which is something that, of course, Sullivan and Frank-Lloyd-Wright both address in their approach. I've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just tell you about a couple of other projects. This is an ornamented column. It's also sitting downstairs. This was one of the first projects I did as part of my PhD project. And this was about thinking about the language of 3D printed clay. And so I knew I wanted to, and this it's this ornamented column, and it's on site here just as a kind of experiment for a day. And what I wanted to do was think about the historic architectural languages of the site and think about ways to actually translate them and reinterpret them in clay. So those tiles in the back with these kind of vegetal patterns on them, I registered them and started to think about how I could work with the print paths to express them in the clay. So that's kind of the formal or aesthetic link between the site and the column. And so the idea is to create a kind of symbiosis thinking about the historic architectural languages. And these are the pieces of the column. And as you can see, they're a much more kind of crude form of the textile column. The inner structure, you know, it's the same. It's an inner and an outer structure, a more structural internal core. But these pieces actually act more like blocks, like dry stack blocks, and just use the column as a kind of support in the middle. And in these final couple of slides, I'm going to take a deviation from columns and talk about walls. Now, this is a really beautiful project made by two students from the MASD fab at ETH in Zurich, Joachim Tobar and Muslima Ravikova. And this is a tutoring collaboration between myself and Maria Smigielska, a researcher and architect at DBT. And we asked students to explore the articulation of joints in a porous ceramic screen wall system. And what I think is really beautiful about this project is it's kind of addressing this question about continuity in additive manufacturing, because they're not actually making clear differentiations between the joints. They're actually thinking about a fusion of the elements that interlock together but are also held in place by a bit of mortar. So I'll finish now, and I think what these projects are at least trying to show are an explorative approach or an attitude to joining clay, additive manufactured clay. examples of how thinking about textiles might inform an approach to 3D printed ceramics. And of course, ideas about the history of ceramics in architecture might inform an approach. And of course, again, why is any of this important? Well, I'll finish by saying that architects must engage with additive manufacturing beyond it being a technological pursuit. We must not forget the history of materials we use and the architectural stories behind their expression. Thank you.
Thanks for that really exquisite presentation, Suzi. Are there some questions? Maybe you didn't talk so much maybe about how in the first column example, how the tool paths were defined in that. You spoke a lot about the jointing and also the overlapping, but the exterior expression of those columns. Would you be able to talk a little bit about those?
The black one or the other one?
No, in your first column example.
This one?
No.
No.
This one. Yeah.
How they were developed, the exterior ones.
Yeah, so they're very articulated. The geometry you were.
Well, yeah. So one thing was about this idea of the textile reference and the weaving kind of nature of clay. So I wanted to start with this kind of very basic interpretation. But the other thing was about this idea of the seam being an element. So I embellished the seam at that point, and also made the decision to do this kind of spring-like or coiling, because what it does two things. One, it shows you that each piece is bespoke, so it's not just kind of standard elements, but also it gives this idea of tension. So although I'm not relating exactly to what's happening with the steel underneath, there's an idea that there's this feeling of energy or movement in the column. So on the outer layer, this is something that's all changing, but the inner piece always remains the same.
Yeah, thank you very much for showing this beautiful work and sharing it with us. I'm impressed about this strategy of putting the things together into the kiln to let them shrink together. How tricky was it to make sure that they fit around the steel column? Do you work with tolerances there, or do you kind of slowly approach towards the optimal diameter?
I mean, it's all about craft and trial and error. I don't use spreadsheets or algorithms or anything like that. I obviously look at what the clay mixture is. I know the water content, and then I measure the diameter on the screen, and then measure the diameter of what I come out, and a few tests of this, and then I've got what I need to do. So it's really just about making a few tests.
And would you need to repeat those tests if the geometry changes of that cladding?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not the geometry of the column. Even if you have a flared piece at the top, the shrinkage is still going to be the same. But if you change the profile, then yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.